I think I have become confident to the point of being a huge fucking asshole. So I just got done, at least I think I'm done, with basically a comment exchange with a friend of mine who I likely will contact when I have enough of a life to actually use Discord again, because currently I'm just in my room all the time and I don't have a life right now, and typically the kind of people who get way too enveloped into Discord don't have a life. And so, in order to solve my unintentional, undiagnosed ADHD, the only way I can do that is by getting a life, by having a stable, meaningful hobby, which I already have, which is YouTube, and having a stable, meaningful career of some kind, and or relationship. Maybe that happens, a stable, meaningful career, and like living in a place, probably Italy. I think I've gotten to the point, and I'm probably going to change my mind about this in a few months, but I think I've gotten to the point where, like, I actually do want to live in Italy. I don't know how I would do that. I'm probably going to end up living in, like, Spain or something, because I think after I transition and after my channel gets more subscribers, more of an international audience, I will just meet someone from the internet and be like, do you want to do a sham marriage, you know? Do you want to do a sham marriage so I can get citizenship into Spain or Ukraine or wherever it is that I would have the ability to go to by getting married. I think if someone liked my videos enough, they would probably be down to do that. If you know enough about one another, it's not a difficult law to break, I don't think. How the fuck would they prove? How the fuck would they prove that it's a scam marriage, you know? They wouldn't be able to. So I'm thinking of just getting to a point where I would be able to meet someone who likes my videos enough to be willing to do that. I don't think it would be that difficult if my audience grew enough. When I get to a point where I'm in Europe, I think I would be able to not get as enveloped into Discord as I do now, because addiction ultimately is tied to environment. We know that when the people who were using heroin in Vietnam, for example, really heavily, when they got home, the vast majority of them didn't have a problem with heroin anymore, because the reason they were using it was because they were in a traumatic war environment. And there's tons and tons of examples you can give of people who are in poverty who become addicted, and then when they get out of poverty, they're not addicted anymore. Even people, well, there's not as many of these because they're just sort of like, people who tend to want to use drugs recreationally, continually, are just more rare. But you can find examples of people who continue using them on and off after being addicted previously, when they get out of whatever life situation that they're in, or poverty. I've seen less examples of people getting out of poverty and then getting out of addiction and still continuing to use, but there have been plenty of people who were just in a bad life situation and then continued using as they got out of that situation and were out of that situation and no longer had a problem anymore. So largely, if we're going on anecdotal reports and just the statistics and the data and the evaluations we can make from such data, addiction is primarily tied to environment, and it's also a matter of self-control and the parameters of your personality, etc. I think many people have struggled with at one point in their life with some kind of addiction or another. In general, when it comes to actually things that are psychoactive, I don't have too much of a problem with it. I don't have too much of a problem with controlling that and being able to monitor my intake, because that's what I've been doing for now a decent number of years, and I've been pretty decently successful at it. For some reason, it's always just seemed like the logical choice. But I think because Discord doesn't have really any far-reaching implications for your physical health and your financial state, and in some ways can actually be beneficial to your financial state. It's much, much easier to let get out of control because it's just an internet website, you know? It doesn't really appear to be that big of a deal in the moment. You can let it get out of control. That's been like the one vice that I've consistently let just get insane. Probably not nearly as insane as some other people, but in my estimation as a generally pretty cautious person who likes to monitor how I do things and consider the ramifications of each thing that I do, I consider that to be a bit wild, how much I've used it. I'm just in my room. Being in my room is mainly what I do every day and has been mainly what I do my whole life. The only way you can really get out of a situation where you're around Discord a lot is to not be in the situation where you're around Discord a lot. To have other things fill up your time to where by the time you actually get around to using it, you don't have the energy to use it. I mean, that was kind of what was going on with me when I was in school, where in the brief portion of time where I was in school and I was still actively deciding to use the platform, I rarely had the energy to actually open up the client and do anything with it because I had expended all of my energy in school. If I'm expending, more of my energy at work or with I'm with whoever that is, then I'm expending less of my energy online because I have less energy for it. Whereas when you're just in your room, you kind of have the energy to do anything. You're set within the parameters of that room. And so the situation becomes it becomes quite different. And so that's why I choose to not use it, is because arguments and sort of just like the decorum of people being dicks becomes a much more serious thing when that's like the only thing you're doing. It's a lot easier to get pissed off when the people you're interacting with is like mainly what you're doing. So because of that pattern of overusing something, that in general being around people is a hugely taxing act for me to do. I gain energy from being alone. I'm an introvert. So being around other people makes me expend a lot of energy. And when you're doing that online, it doesn't really feel like a productive task. It doesn't feel like you're doing anything particularly real. It just feels like you're expending energy endlessly at something that doesn't really exist. There's a certain meaninglessness to it, a certain nihilism that regular interactions on Discord online tend to have. That isn't to say that, we aren't all connected in the lane sense, or that all interactions you have are necessarily going to be marred by that disconnect that the internet has. I think in some ways internet interactions can be more authentic in the sense that you find people who you connect with more, but imagine connecting with those people in the meet space. What would that be like? There is some ways where you can also express yourself in a way that's more true to the way that you view yourself, because ultimately identity is just the continual accumulation of how you would view yourself. And these ideas that come up over time based on the consistencies that you've observed, that you're able to have a more malleable presentation on the internet. So as a result of that more malleable presentation of yourself, that ability to more greatly customize how you're presented, you can feel more authentic online. I've certainly felt way more authentic online because, as some of you might know, my physical presence and the sound of my voice and certain aspects of my general decorum often do not line up with the way that I see myself internally. Sometimes they really do, and I like it when I'm able to project that without even really trying. Like, I think the sort of emotional suppression that I've done has become such a huge aspect of my life that the mask sometimes feels like it's taken over. That's become the autopilot that I've lived through. Other times, the mask appears completely non-existent, and I don't even notice it. And then other people notice it, you know? Other people notice that I'm being incredibly trans online, and I don't even know. Have no idea. So, identity in the post meat space world is a very malleable thing, and if you want to present yourself online through the way your text is, um, and the way that you customize your online avatar, etc., that is possible. For if you're in a period of your life, like me, where there are large aspects of yourself that you would like to transition into something else, um, that would more accurately reflect who you feel that you are, then being online can provide a great sense of comfort, because in that space it can appear um, as if to people that you are reflective of those traits more so than you may appear physically. That's a great thing. Um, but again, it comes with drawbacks. Like I said, like there is often a general disconnect that you will feel from not having the very real physicality of interactions. Um, and so it's all about weighing the positives and negatives. In my case, because I spend so much time alone, to where the computer screen is my primary interaction with the world, the way that I interface with things, it's very easy for me to get entirely caught up in that one-way transaction between other people, where I start thinking like these interactions would be so much better if I just experienced them in person. Um, and again, like sometimes text on a screen can be this really euphoric thing, especially when you're talking to someone who really means something to you. Um, but I think there's a point in your life when the internet means more because you can't have those interactions physically, and because you aren't the person who you necessarily want to be yet. I think for some people, the internet is just the only place they can be the person who they want to be for their entire life. I think someone like No Thank You is a good example of this, where he'll not physically interact with people on a regular basis. He has like one friend IRL, and they don't really see each other very much. When I look at the art he does and the way that he communicates online, it's all marred by this practiced sort of abstract character each time, and it's always different. There's a lot of contradictions in the way that he presents himself, but it's trying to communicate to you something deeper than what the text itself is. And the contradictions are kind of the point of it. And when you start considering like the fact that this is attempting to communicate to you something beyond words, beyond the mere consistencies by which people would typically communicate themselves through, you start getting the sense that the internet is being used as a medium for several identities here, and that the several identities are what makes it more authentic, because the person he is cannot simply be contained by one. And in the real world, you're often constrained to just one. That human communication must be limited because you must dumb yourself down to a certain extent. I just so happen to be the kind of person who is simple-minded enough to be mostly dumbed down in what my approach to identity is. It's only because I've been on the internet so long and have had so much emotional suppression that I have to come to these highly abstracted conclusions that I communicate to you. It's not because I'm intrinsically more complicated per se. It's more so because of the circumstances that I'm coming from, and I'm now decoding all of that stuff only to get to the conclusion that I am quite simple in my approach at my baseline. And knowing that makes me really comfortable. You know, being able to be that makes me really comfortable. And I'm being that more and more every day. Um, and I think that's a fairly natural way that human beings are. He's not a particularly natural person. And so I think for someone like him, his approach to the internet makes perfect sense because it's just where he belongs. Um, I would have said the same thing at one point, but ultimately, at the end of the day, the reason I would have said that was because of the kind of emotional suppression that I've been talking about. Um, I think a lot of people on the internet would feel the same way. It's something that you interface with like this because you're at a time in your life when that makes sense, you know? And eventually that time passes. Um, and so what I'm getting to with all of this is that I was going to talk about how I was like becoming an asshole. About I actually forgot the point I was gonna make because I started going on this long identity rant. Uh, but I'm starting to just have no fucks given when it comes to um, when I feel like people are out of line or when I feel like people are just being ridiculous. I will just say the most like bare bone or not bare bones. I'm kind of, I'm kind of being over dramatic at this point. Um, I will just say exactly what my stance is. And I'll tell you, like, I'm becoming such a straight shooter that it sounds like I'm aggressive when I'm not being aggressive. That's the thing, is that, like, I'm not angry when I say any of the things that I say, but I appear like I am to people because I'm just that much of a straight shooter. And I think it's because a lot of the stuff I've said in the past has been so, like, marred in this like Pete Buttigieg-esque flowery language of trying to coat the things you say with five different layers of of um of adulteration in order to not offend the sensibilities of the people who you're listening to it, while at the same time I've been a rambunctious YouTube character who is offending everyone with my presentation, which is ultimately a product of the third person view by which I've viewed myself and the entire world around me for a large portion of my life. Um, that doing so, being disconnected from the identity of the things I say would allow me to do such a thing. Um, at the same time, when it comes to a lot of my personal relationships, I've taken this very like peacemaking attitude towards the things that I'm saying, where I'm trying to reduce harm as much as I can, and while doing that, losing some of the genuinity behind the things that I'm saying, but doing so so often to the point where it feels like that's more authentic than what I really think. And that's a greatly harmful thing because it causes the kind of emotional suppression that leads to the kind of anger outbursts that I've talked about in the past, which is a deeply unhealthy thing. And as I've allowed myself to just not give a shit, and I think coming out certainly helped with that, as I've allowed myself to just not give a shit and just say exactly what I think, there's no hint of anger to anything I say anymore. It's all complete, it's just a straight shot, you know? And I think that's pretty cool. It feels like I'm having character development in real time every single day.